Hello, I'm Grimgrindo and welcome to this review. If you're a long-time subscriber or perhaps have glanced over into the suggested videos that are likely attached to this video, you would probably be not too surprised to learn that I'm a rather large fan of the Banjo-Kazooie franchise. If I wasn't, I probably wouldn't have made quite so many videos in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. However, my love for the series did not in fact begin with Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, nor did it even begin on the Xbox 360. Instead, it began exactly where the series did on the Nintendo 64 with the very first game in the series, Banjo-Kazooie, which is what we're going to have a look at today. Although, as any eagle-eyed viewer has probably already noticed, this is in fact the Xbox 360 arcade version of the game, which I have chosen to play rather simply because I wanted the achievements. And it should probably be noted that I'm not entirely unbiased towards this game. I have a huge amount of nostalgia for it. I probably put about 150 hours into it when I was playing it at a younger age, and the version of it I'm playing in this video I actually won for free while doing a Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts build competition back in, 2009 or something. But on the other hand, my nostalgia for the game springs from my absolute enjoyment of the game, and my want to win a free copy of the game came from my already existing love for the game, so I suppose I'm biased towards the game in the sense that I'm doing this review knowing that I love the game, but in that sense, if we're counting the enjoyment of a game or the lack thereof as bias, then in that sense, the subjective nature of reviews means that pretty much every single review is equally biased. But regardless of whether or not you agree with that statement, and now with all my chips on the table, let's get into looking at Banjo-Kazooie. So what exactly is Banjo-Kazooie? Well, for all of you who have somehow missed out on the game, Banjo-Kazooie is a 3D platformer in which you play as a combined duo of Banjo and Kazooie, a bear with a bird in his backpack, who are on a quest to defeat the evil witch Gruntilda and retrieve Banjo's sister Tooty, who was stolen by the witch because Grunty intends to steal her prettiness to make Tooty ugly and to make herself pretty. Is it an utterly ridiculous storyline? Yes, of course it is, but you're playing as an anthropomorphic bear with a bird in his backpack, so you should probably have gone into this with the expectation to suspend your disbelief. And of course, all the while, the entire journey is chock full of the same cheeky humour that Rare has become somewhat famous for. The game is most commonly explained as being like Mario 64 but better, which I think was a pretty fair explanation when the game first came out, because 3D platformers were pretty new, so it was pretty much the easiest way to sum up the game, but I don't think in this modern day it's fair to simply say that Banjo-Kazooie is like Mario 64 but better, because aside from them inhabiting the same genre, they actually play and feel like completely different games. Despite this, however, I will say that Banjo-Kazooie is probably my favourite 3D platformer, with the possible exception of its sequel. This is in no small part due to the controls, which I consider to be some of the tightest found in any 3D platformer so far. It has pretty much become my standard and expectation in 3D platformers, perhaps to my detriment, because when it comes to how responsive and overall perfect the controls in Banjo-Kazooie feels, we have set a bar so high that even in the modern day of 3D platforming, it is rarely met. In the playthrough of the game I did before making this review, not once did I die because of bad controls, but instead due to the darn fool controlling said controls, namely me. Adding to this, the variety of the character you control is too rarely equalled. Utilizing Banjo, you can run, jump, and roll. However, throughout the game you unlock more abilities that usually involve Kazooie, which will eventually allow you to sprint, fly for a short distance, do a backflip which is much higher than the regular jump, do a peck in the air which is much better than the regular attack, shoot or plop out eggs, and do a sort of forward jab. Oh, and of course the all-important ground pound. However, taking even further, there are also pads you can find on the ground which will allow you to jump even further or actually fly properly, and items which will allow you to run even faster and walk through dangerous territory. You will throughout the adventure pretty much have to utilize all of these in order to win jiggies and lay down a beatdown on the witch Gruntilda. Now you may have noticed I just called the game an adventure, and I use the word rather purposefully because to me that's what the game really feels like. As you progress through the game you play through 9 different worlds, that's excluding Gruntilda's Lair which is the overworld, and Spiral Mountain which is sort of like the tutorial level. Each world has its own theme and collectibles which you have to collect and unlock in order to open doors and levels, moving higher up in Grunty's lair, until you finally make your way to the tower at the top in which you have your final showdown. These worlds that you enter throughout the game are so fun to explore and so utterly beautiful to look at, that long back in the time of Yonder when I was playing the game as a youngling, there were multiple times when I would boot up the game despite having finished it just to explore worlds that I had already seen every single inch of. I enjoy the variety of the world so much in this game that if I was forced to name a favourite level, I wouldn't be able to settle on but one. Mad Monster Mansion and Freeze Easy Peak would definitely be high up on the list because they're basically video game embodiments of my favourite holidays, And what is probably the most difficult level in the entire game, Click Clock Woods, would definitely be up on the list as well, because even as a youngling I thought it was genius that you had to play the level in 4 different seasons, and it felt like the entire level was set in a Chip and Dale cartoon. And as I mentioned, being the most difficult level in the game, Click Clock Woods is also the final level in the game before the final showdown against Gruntilda, which is a pretty good indicator of the difficulty curve found within the game. The first level, Mumbo's Mountain, if you've played the game before, can probably be polished off relatively easily in about 20 minutes. But on the other hand, Click Clock Woods took me over an hour to do. And the final showdown against Grunty is definitely not an easy fight. Overall, the difficulty curve is rather fair, and ramps up its challenges every single world about to the degree that you'd like to continue keeping the game interesting. Each world has its own music which suits the stage's theme perfectly, and are populated with wonderful cartoon enemies and allies. Speaking of cartoon, the cartoon nature of the graphics in the game are one of the things I enjoyed about the game most as a youngling, and now today as I revisit the game I'm forced to acknowledge that this is one of the reasons the game has aged so darn well. Banjo-Kazooie looks as good today as it did when it first came out. This is not a statement you can say for very many games on the Nintendo 64. Because it was never attempting to replicate real life and instead going for a cartoony look, that cartoony look still looks just as good as it always did. And before you get all huffy and puffy and say, "But Grim, you're playing this on the Xbox 360, they enhance the graphics and turn it into widescreen and HD and all that jazz." Yes, you're correct, they certainly did. The Xbox 360 version is widescreen and it does look quite a bit sharper. But as you can see by this side-by-side comparison, the Xbox 360 version is obviously on the top and the Nintendo 64 version is on the bottom. While being a little bit more blurry, the original version on the Nintendo 64 still has bright colours and wonderful graphics that shine through. I really don't suggest either of the two versions of the game over top of each other. They are pretty much exactly the same. If you've got a Nintendo 64, the original is definitely worth a purchase, and if you've only got an Xbox 360, then the Xbox 360 version is definitely worth a purchase too. If you're also planning to buy Banjo-Tooie and Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, it's probably worth it to get it on the 360 for the stop and swap tie-ins. I won't go into that now, but it's a thing that has a little bit of overarching across all of the games, and if you're like me and you just wanted to play it again and get some achievements for it, it's definitely worth revisiting it on the 360. Although it should be noted that the Xbox 360 version of the game is considerably easier to 100%, because unlike the Nintendo 64 version, when you leave a map, you don't lose all of the notes you've collected. This might sound like a pretty small change, but it does make a rather large difference on levels like Rusty Bucket Bay and Click Clock Woods, where finishing the level without dying is actually rather difficult. And as a side note, if you've already moved on to the Xbox One, I believe the Xbox 360 version is the one found on Rare Replay. Overall, Banjo-Kazooie is a fantastically enjoyable, wonderfully humorous, and perfectly polished 3D platformer, which I still believe to be the poster child for platformers to this modern day. It is a genre which over the last decade has gone, for the most part, rather sadly neglected. However, it does appear that with Playtonic's up-and-coming release of Yooka-Laylee, the genre is about to get a new revival. But before it does, why not check out a true classic and give Banjo-Kazooie a shot? And with all of that said and done, as always, thanks for watching, and until next time, I have been and still am Grim Grindle.